Hello, music makers. Today we will be talking about how we can use Ableton's limiter and saturator to save headroom so that our mixes have a fat sausage look. A lot of people have the misconception that to get a really loud mix, that a lot of this happens in the mastering process, but it actually should happen in the mix process if you really want to get down to it. And if you want your mixes to be proper, you should be achieving this in the mix process. Even very loud, heavily saturated recordings like Flying Lotus's work, if you talk to his mastering engineer, he doesn't put any more than half a dB, 1 or 2, not more than 3 dBs added to the final overall signal when he's mastering his tracks. All that saturation, goodness, and loudness is achieved by applying limiting and saturation and compression very carefully and in little baby bites to all the different elements in your tracks. I don't put a hi-hat or snare or anything that's percussive on a track without at least some saturation or some limiting to tame the peaks. And the reason why is because it's magical what they do, and once you learn a little bit how to use these free tools that come with Ableton, because all the plugins that come with Ableton are free. It's one of the points of many of my tutorials to show you the power of how to use just the plugins that come with Ableton, that you can do professional productions just in Ableton. You don't have to obsess about new plugins, even though we all love new plugins. But Ableton has everything you need. If that's all you're holding out for, saving your money for, if you think you need anything else, you really don't. You don't even need samples. You can create your samples, and you can use the drum synths that come with Ableton, which we'll use a couple today. So let's just get to work, I guess, and let's start with maybe a hi-hat. I like starting with hi-hats because they're easy to see and hear the changes to. So let's start with a saturator. Now, this isn't a saturator tutorial necessarily. This is just to show you how to clip percussive elements with the saturator and what I do. So we're only going to talk about analog clip. In the analog clip mode here, in this drop down, the incoming signal is clipped immediately and completely like a limiter. But we can also add some saturation to that versus just a straight digital clip, which you can do here if you prefer that. I usually stay in this mode, and there's only a few features we have to think about. First of all, let's put this into an effects wrap. So let's group this, go here. If you don't know how to do this, I'm going to set up a macro. So when I drive this drive up, it's going to make the signal louder, but I'm going to want this output to go down at the same time so that I can hear the changes more accurately. If I keep this output to 0 and crank this up, the signal is just going to get louder and louder and louder, and that's not what we want today. What we really want is for the drum sound to not change at all, but for the overall decibel level to go down quite a bit. So we're saving headroom on the drum itself, the channel itself, but the sound really is not going to change much. It actually will get thicker, and depending on how much you want to drive it, it can get grittier and dirtier. Let's map this drive to this macro, the output here as well. We want them to go the opposite. So now we want that drive to be at 0. So here we go. When I turn this macro, as the drive goes up, you'll see the output going down. So the signal will stay the same. Let's do some max for live, max instrument, DS hi-hat. How's that sound? Let's tap in a little. Okay, let's get this at a reasonable level. Put a little groove on it, because I just always like to. Let's add one of my favorite plugins of all time, Smexoscope. You can get it for free. I'll put a link in the description. So let's amp it up a little bit so we can really see the effects of this. We have our hi-hat going into our saturator, hitting the bus or hitting the channel. So it's maxing out at about negative 9.67. So now let's move this macro up. And I'm going to move it up until I feel like I hear the hi-hat starting to saturate or change. I'll move it past that point and then back it down. So obviously there. So now it's very obvious. But you see what's happening to the signal is it's just clipping it off. But it doesn't sound so bad, huh? It's doing an analog clip to it and adding a little color. And for a lot of instruments, it sounds really nice. It doesn't work for everything, but it works for very percussive elements. As you can see, it's clipping the wave, and we're way up. I'm over exaggerating. So now let's take this hi-hat. So we're hitting at about, let's see, into the negative 9.5 area. Currently, there we go. So now let's click this again. Let's see what it's doing. So now we're peaking at about negative 12. So far we're saving a little over 2 dBs on this track just by doing this. But I think I can go a little more, because I think hi-hats sound really good gritty. So you might be able to take this up. So negative 14.7, you can see we're clipping the transients off of this hi-hat. It's kind of sounding neat. Let's A/B this. All right, so let's back off this a little bit. So see how it immediately jumps almost to 10 when I take that on and off. When I put it on, we save about 2 dBs of headroom, and it sounds a little thicker and louder. Actually, it doesn't sound quieter, does it? It sounds louder. And I like that. Let's add a clap. All right, so here's our clap. All right, let's do the same thing we did before. Let's put a saturator on here. All right, no saturator. We're hitting the channel at -16. Let's duplicate this effects rack so I don't have to make another one. All right, here we go. Now let's raise the saturation up again. I'm going to raise it up again until I hear the sound changing and raise it past that point, and then I'll pull it back. So claps and snares and things like that, also, you know, percussive elements, they can sound really good with saturation because you're clipping with an analog clip like this, because this clips immediately, yet it's also adding a little grit and weight to it. Let's see what this clap is hitting at -15.8. Let's raise this up. So now let's see what it's peaking at. Now it is peaking at -21.1. So if you notice, we saved 5 dBs of headroom. And I think personally, the claps sound better. Peaking at -15.8. And you notice pretty unruly peaks going on. With this on, thickens the sound up a little bit, clips the transients, and we save 5 dBs of headroom. By doing this to all the elements, all the percussive elements on your beats, putting a saturator on each channel. You can also put one on a return and send to it, but I like to use different saturators. There's millions of different saturators out there. Use different flavors if you have 2 or 3. If you have, you can see here, you can use Decapitator, there's Saturn, UAD has some nice analog saturation. You can use trash. There's so many saturators. Abletons have a Fatso Junior by UAD. That's a really beautiful sounding. I could do a tutorial just on that. We have some Redux is a bit shaper, and so forth. But you don't need all that fancy stuff. All you need is a saturator and a limiter. We can also save headroom with Ableton's limiter almost in the same way. A lot of people use limiters just to slam their tracks and get them to be really loud. But you can use this simple limiter to save headroom in the same way. So again, nothing's on. We have our claps hitting at negative 15.5 still. We can put this limiter on. Nothing's happening to the signal still. A lot of people just crank up their signal like that and they're confused about what to do with a limiter. What we want to do is lower the ceiling. This will show us our reduction, our peak reduction, every time. So now every time you see that hit, that's clipping the clap. And we're taking roughly, at the most, we're taking about negative 6 dB off of the signal, which means we should be about at negative 20 or 21. On. Now we're negative 21. Off. And we're going pretty extreme too. You don't need to save 6 dBs if you don't want to. We can go make it more subtle. Still saving 3 dBs. Basically sounds the same. So everyone likes using loops. Loops have crazy volume fluctuations a lot of times, lots of stuff going on. So let's see how we can use the Saturator plugin to maybe save some headroom on this loop and thicken it up at the same time. So let's copy this effects track again, add it to this loop. Put that there, get rid of that, lower that. So now we're peaking at negative 15.1. Off, leave it off. It's gonna push into the negative, look at that one open hi-hat. Super annoying. With such a dirty loop, you literally are not hearing the difference between when this is on or off, but you're saving 6 dBs of headroom on this one channel. Negative 15.2. So that. Is that magic? By putting a little saturation here, a little limiting there, using your ears, you'll save a lot of headroom, and you'll notice as your mixes are a lot thicker sounding. So if you like this tutorial and you want more audio tutorials, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. percussive elements. But I think you get the picture. I hope this helped.